Celia Whitaker had chosen the mariner's lantern because cowards behave differently when surrounded by white tablecloths, wine glasses, and witnesses, or at least that was what she had believed before the narrow hallway outside the private dining room became a place where every witness in Charleston suddenly found something else to look at. An hour earlier, she had walked in through the front doors with a leather folio tucked under one arm, wearing a navy dress, low heels, and the composed expression people expected from the woman who had inherited Whitaker DataWorks after her father's stroke and turned it from a regional billing software firm into a national financial compliance platform. The restaurant sat near the Cooper River, with high windows facing a black sheet of water broken by harbor lights and the slow movement of cargo cranes beyond the glass. It was old Charleston dressed for money. Brass lamps, polished floors, hush in the walls, a pianist in the corner playing standards softly enough that every table could pretend its secrets were private. Celia had chosen it because Raymond Vale liked rooms where people could see him being gracious, and because she intended to end their partnership where he could not easily raise his voice, grab her wrist, or make a threat without a dozen respectable people pretending not to hear. That last part, she would learn, had been foolish. Respectable people could pretend not to hear almost anything if the cost of hearing seemed high enough. At table 6, against the far wall near the service station, Graham Voss sat alone over a cup of coffee gone cold and a plate of flounder he had ordered because it was the least expensive entree that would not embarrass the waiter. His canvas jacket had a frayed cuff. His tie had been loosened after a long day installing deadbolts at a pharmacy on King Street, and the hostess had first tried to seat him by the kitchen before the manager remembered that table 6 had been reserved under a canceled name. Graham did not mind the mistake. Men who looked like him were often placed near swinging doors, supply closets, and other places where the world stored what it did not expect to admire. His daughter, Lottie, was home with Mrs. Alvarez from downstairs, finishing algebra homework and pretending she was too old to be checked on every hour. Graham had promised her he would eat one proper meal somewhere that used cloth napkins, because she had caught him 3 nights in a row standing over the sink with toast and peanut butter and told him, in the exact voice her mother used to use, that grief was not a meal plan. So he had come to the mariner's lantern for no reason nobler than hunger, fatigue, and the fragile hope of sitting in a room where nobody needed him for 60 uninterrupted minutes. But Graham had spent too many years in rooms where harmless things turned deadly, while everyone else was still admiring the wallpaper, and by the time Celia crossed the dining room, he had already seen enough to set down his fork. She entered like a woman determined not to let fear change her posture. Her eyes moved once to the front door, once to the bar mirror, once to the hallway behind the private room, and only then to Raymond Vale, who was waiting at a corner table with a smile that looked warm until a person noticed it never reached the lower half of his face. Raymond rose when Celia approached, the polished gentleman in a silver tie, silver hair, and a suit that had cost more than Graham's truck. He had the kind of charm that came wrapped in patience, as if he were always allowing others to arrive at conclusions he had arranged days earlier. 2 years before, when Whitaker DataWorks nearly buckled under debt after Celia's father became ill, Raymond had appeared with bridge financing, introductions, a line of credit, and the careful gratitude of a man who wanted to be mistaken for a savior. Celia had believed him because desperation can make rescue and ownership sound like the same word. Now she knew better. Her internal controller had flagged a set of reconciliation errors 3 weeks earlier. Payments routed through vendor accounts that belonged to no active vendor, transfer trails that bent through holding companies in Nevada and Belize, charitable grants that reversed into private funds overnight, and consulting invoices tied to shell entities with names bland enough to disappear in a balance sheet. Celia had spent nights in her office with the blinds closed, tracing what her company had become in the dark. Raymond had not invested in Whitaker DataWorks because he believed in her father's platform. He had needed a clean system with federal clients, transaction volume, and a respected family name behind it. He had turned her company into a screen for money that should have drawn prison sentences, not management fees. She came to the restaurant carrying printed excerpts, notarized records, and a small encrypted drive holding the files she had not trusted to any server. She had already sent a sealed packet to her attorney, or at least enough of one to make Raymond uncertain. She told herself that uncertainty would protect her. At table 6, Graham heard almost none of the words at first, only tone and rhythm. Raymond's steady murmur, Celia's clipped replies, the small silence that followed whenever she refused to be guided back toward courtesy. Then Raymond slid a revised agreement across the table and placed 2 fingers on top of it, not pushing, simply resting there as if the paper already belonged to her hand. "You signed tonight," he said quietly, loud enough that Graham caught the shape of the threat without leaning closer. "Tomorrow morning we announce a restructuring. You take a medical leave and the board thanks you for your service. It can be dignified." Celia did not touch the document. "You used my company to wash criminal money." Raymond's smile remained. "Your company kept breathing because of me. My father's name kept your dirt clean." The 3 men Raymond had brought with him moved then, not dramatically, not in any way that would alarm a room trained to look away from the discomfort of powerful guests. One stood near the hallway to the restrooms, broad-shouldered and pale-eyed, his jacket hanging open to show nothing and suggest plenty. Another drifted behind Celia's chair as if checking his phone. The third, younger and restless, leaned against the coat check with his hands in his pockets. Graham noticed the triangle they made before anyone else noticed there was a triangle at all. Raymond's voice lowered. "The records in your office will tell a different story by morning. The press will be told you moved funds personally. Your board will be told I tried to stop you. Your mother will be reminded of what happens when old signatures are questioned by prosecutors." Celia's face changed at the word mother, but she held her ground. "I won't sign." "Then you will not leave with anything useful." Celia stood first, gathering the folio with both hands because one hand had started to tremble despite all the discipline she had spent a lifetime building. She took 3 steps toward the hallway before the broad man, whose name she would later learn was Ellis Rourke, moved into her path. He did it with a waiter's politeness, shoulder angled, smile faint, body blocking the exit while pretending to wait for someone else. The man behind her, Corbin Hale, closed the space near the dining room. The restless one, Niles Troy, reached with quick fingers and took her phone from her hand before she understood that disbelief had slowed her more effectively than force. No one shouted. No chair overturned. The pianist kept playing. A woman at the nearest table looked directly at Celia, looked at Ellis, and then lowered her eyes to her wine as if shame were less dangerous when studied through crystal. Ellis leaned close enough that Celia smelled peppermint and tobacco. "You make noise, you become the story before midnight. Drunk executive, public breakdown, assault, whatever fits best." Celia looked past him into the dining room and saw faces turning away one by one. Men in tailored jackets, women with diamonds at their throats, a city councilman she had once donated to, an accountant whose firm billed her company 6 figures a year. A waiter took one brave step toward the hallway, caught Raymond's stare, and stopped with a stack of dessert plates in his hands. The silence of decent people became a second set of hands holding her in place. Across the room, Graham rose from table 6. He did not rush. He folded his napkin once, placed it beside the plate, and moved toward the hallway with the calm of a man who had already measured the floor, the lights, the exits, the camera above the host stand, the kitchen door, the number of civilians who might be hurt if fear became noise. Celia saw him coming and did not call out. Her lips barely moved when she said, "They won't let me leave." Graham heard her because he had been listening for the moment. A person stopped asking politely and began telling the truth. Ellis saw Graham first and laughed softly, more offended than threatened by the sight of a tired man in a worn jacket approaching men who were paid to make rooms smaller around other people. "Not your evening, friend," Ellis said. Graham stopped 3 feet away, hands visible, voice low enough that the nearest tables had to strain to hear. "Give her phone back and step away from the hallway." Niles grinned with the quick, ugly pleasure of a young man who had been waiting for permission to hurt someone. He lunged forward to shove Graham in the chest. Graham turned his body half an inch, caught Niles's wrist, guided the momentum down instead of meeting it, and set the younger man on one knee so neatly that the only sound was a sharp breath leaving his lungs. The movement lasted less than 2 seconds. It had no flourish, no anger, no theatrical strike for the benefit of the room. It was so quiet that its meaning arrived late, rippling across the restaurant after the fact. Forks paused halfway to mouths. The pianist missed a note. Raymond stood near his table with the revised agreement still in one hand and finally lost the smallest piece of his smile. "Who exactly are you?" he asked. Graham did not look at him. "Nobody who wants this to get worse." Corbin's right hand disappeared low beside his jacket seam, and the hallway sconce caught the quick wink of a blade before the knife cleared his sleeve. Graham reached for a silver serving tray on a side station, lifted it like a shield, and struck Corbin's wrist with the rim hard enough to make the knife clatter beneath a chair. Ellis seized Celia by the upper arm, trying to drag her in front of him, and for the first time her composure broke into a small sound of pain. Graham moved then with a speed the room had not expected from a man who looked as if he spent his days carrying toolboxes. He stepped inside Ellis's leverage, turned the man's thumb toward his elbow, and forced him to release Celia without snapping anything that would not heal. Ellis staggered backward, pale now, his confidence briefly separated from his body. Graham did not hit him again. He did not need to. That restraint frightened Raymond more than rage would have. Rage could be baited. This man was making choices. Celia backed against the wall, breathing hard, the folio clutched to her ribs, and looked at the stranger from table 6, as if the restaurant had produced him from some moral foundation she had assumed no longer existed. Raymond lifted his phone and made a show of dialing emergency services. Graham caught only the sequence on the screen before Raymond turned away, but it was enough. Too short for 911, too familiar in the thumb's movement to be random. "Kitchen," Graham said to Celia. "Now." "My phone. Later." "The drive is in my folio." "Then hold on to it." They moved before Raymond's men recovered, slipping through the kitchen door as the manager finally arrived, and Raymond began speaking in the injured voice of a respected patron attacked without cause. The kitchen exploded around them in heat and motion, steam rolling from a stockpot, dishwashers shouting, pans ringing, a line cook holding a spatula like a weapon until he saw Celia's face and lowered it. 2 uniformed officers entered through the dining room less than a minute later, and relief flashed across Celia's face until Graham's hand closed lightly around her wrist. "Not police," he said. "How do you know?" "Bad badges, new boots. They're watching Raymond, not the room." The imposters pushed through the kitchen with authority painted on top of rehearsal, ordering everyone back, telling Celia to surrender the documents, telling Graham to put his hands where they could see them. Graham used the tight aisles and hanging racks the way another man might use open ground. He tipped a bus cart into one man's shins, drove the serving tray into the other's forearm, shoved a swinging freezer door into the first man's shoulder, and kept Celia moving behind him through steam, noise, and the panic of cooks trying not to be involved in a felony. In the confusion, Niles came through the service door behind them, snatched the encrypted drive from the side sleeve of Celia's folio, and bolted toward the alley. Celia lunged after him, but Graham blocked her with his body. "No." That's everything. You are not. The sentence struck her harder than his hand ever could have. For 2 years, everything in her life had been measured by what could be lost on paper: equity, control, debt, reputation, accounts, votes. Graham's voice carried a different arithmetic. He guided her through a side corridor into a narrow alley that smelled of rain, old beer, and fryer oil. By the time Graham reached the parking lot, a dark green sedan was pulling away with Niles in the passenger seat. He did not chase like a man in a movie. He stood under the security light, memorized the plate, the cracked left tail light, the sticker on the rear glass from a Beaufort Marina, the direction it turned, and the exact time from the glowing bank sign across the street. Celia caught up behind him, furious and shaking. "You let him take it." Graham turned. "I kept him from taking you." Before she could answer, her phone, recovered from a kitchen counter where Niles had dropped it after removing the drive, buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "If you see sunrise, your company won't see Friday." Celia read it twice. Graham watched her jaw set, not in denial now, but in decision. "I need to know who you are," she said. "No," he answered. "You need to get somewhere they don't control the doors." Graham brought her to a shuttered locksmith shop on a side street north of Calhoun, where the front window advertised key cutting, safe repair, and after-hours emergency service. The shop belonged to a friend named Harlan DeWitt, a retired investigator with a bad knee, a worse temper, and an office above the workroom where file boxes were stacked in towers so precarious they looked like they were being held up by suspicion alone. Harlan answered Graham's call with a complaint about being old, then went silent when Graham read him the plate number. Within 12 minutes, he had coffee burning in a pot, 2 laptops open, and a photograph of the green sedan on one screen from a toll camera near North Charleston. "That car has shown up in 3 corporate intimidation files in 18 months, Harlan said, tapping the screen with the end of a pencil. "Different shell companies, same drivers, same method, clean target, dirty records, public scandal first, legal questions later." Celia stood by the window with her arms folded tight, looking down at the empty street as if Raymond might appear simply because she was tired enough to imagine him everywhere. "He's done this before?" "Twice that I can prove," Harlan said. "A medical billing processor in Tampa, a port logistics firm outside Norfolk, owners smeared, boards panicked, assets sold cheap to entities with no visible relationship to the man who engineered the collapse. By the time anyone sorted out the truth, the companies were dead, and the money had moved on." Graham leaned against a filing cabinet, one hand near his phone, waiting for the text from Mrs. Alvarez confirming Lottie had gone to bed. It came at 12:47. He read it once, closed his eyes briefly, and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Celia noticed because she was beginning to notice him the way he noticed rooms. "You have someone at home, my daughter." "How old?" 13. "Does she know where you are?" "She knows I had dinner." Harlan gave him a look over the laptop. "That's one word for it." Celia reached for her purse. "I can pay you both, whatever your rates are." Graham shook his head before she finished. "No, that is not pride I can afford right now." "It's not pride. Money creates the wrong question. The question is where the drive is going and how long before they use it." Harlan found the answer near dawn, after tracing a reservation tied to the sedan's driver through a luxury hotel near Marion Square. Raymond had booked a private conference room for 8 that evening under the name of a consulting group that did not officially exist. A buyer was coming, or a partner, or someone inside Celia's own circle bold enough to appear in a public lobby while she was being destroyed by the morning news. By then, the story had already broken. Financial channels reported that Celia Whitaker had assaulted an investor during a dispute over missing company funds. A cropped video from the Mariner's lantern showed Graham forcing Niles to one knee, then Corbin stumbling backward. Then Celia, clutching the folio, stripped of the hallway, the stolen phone, the knife, the false officers, and every second that would have made the truth inconvenient. The board of Whitaker Data Works called an emergency meeting before sunrise and requested that Celia temporarily step aside for the protection of employees, clients, and stakeholders. Raymond gave a statement through a spokesperson describing himself as heartbroken by Celia's apparent distress and prepared, if necessary, to provide interim leadership during a painful transition. Celia listened to the statement in Harlan's office with her hands flat on the table. When it ended, she said, "He planned the headline before he invited me to dinner." "Yes," Graham said. "Then I need to walk into that hotel and take back what he stole. You walk in angry, he gets the second headline." "I am not built to hide." "No," Graham said. "You're built to lead. Tonight, those are not the same thing." She hated him for being right, but not enough to ignore him. They spent the day building something that was not quite a plan and not quite a trap. Celia called her attorney, Beatrice Wynne, using Harlan's secure line, and gave her enough to keep the board from removing her outright before evening. Harlan arranged building access through a maintenance contractor, who owed him a favor from a divorce case no one liked discussing. Graham borrowed a gray work shirt, tool belt, and cap from the shop downstairs, then removed the name patch with a pocket knife so no innocent technician would inherit trouble. Celia would enter the hotel as herself because hiding her face would look like guilt. She would sit in the lobby, make one visible call to Beatrice, and watch for anyone from her company who had no reason to be there. Graham would go upstairs through the service elevator and locate the drive before Raymond could move it. Harlan would monitor the exits from a delivery van that smelled strongly of old carpet glue and peppermint candy. None of them said aloud that the plan was fragile. Fragile plans were often the only kind available when honest people were forced to respond to criminals who had been preparing for years. The Kings Harbor Hotel glittered under chandeliers and magnolias in tall blue and white vases, its lobby full of wedding guests, consultants, tourists, and men with briefcases trying to look bored because boredom suggested importance. Celia took a seat near the fireplace with a glass of untouched water and watched the elevators reflected in a gilt mirror. She had learned to command rooms by entering them, but that night she had to sit still while other people moved through the game Raymond had built around her. At 8:11, Arthur Bellamy crossed the lobby toward the private elevators, wearing a tan overcoat and the mild, paternal expression that had made generations of Whitaker employees trust him. He had been her father's closest advisor, her confirmation sponsor, the man who sent flowers every year on the anniversary of her father's stroke with a note saying, "He would be proud." Celia's breath caught so sharply that the woman on the sofa beside her looked over. Arthur did not see her. He was too busy checking his watch and moving toward the elevator with the ease of someone who believed the building would keep his secrets. Upstairs, Graham slipped along a service corridor lined with linen carts and brass sconces, past a security camera Harlan had looped for 90 seconds, and reached the hallway outside the Magnolia Room just as Raymond's people transferred a small portable safe from Niles to Ellis. The drive was inside it, Graham guessed, along with whatever additional poison Raymond intended to plant in Celia's name. He had almost reached the freight stairwell when Corbin stepped out from behind a housekeeping cart and recognized him. The fight that followed was short, cramped, and ugly. Corbin drove him into a wall hard enough to crack plaster. Graham used the narrowness against him, hooked one foot behind Corbin's ankle, and sent him into the linen cart with a crash that brought a maid to the end of the hallway. Graham showed her both empty hands and said, "Go downstairs, call the real police from outside the building." She did. That single act of courage, Graham would later think, mattered as much as anything he did that night. But the delay cost him. By the time he reached the stairwell, Raymond had already taken the portable safe through a private exit. Celia saw him at the side entrance, moving quickly with the safe under one arm and Arthur Bellamy just behind him. She stood in his path before she had fully decided to move. Raymond smiled with real pleasure. Celia, you never did know when to stop making things worse. Who else? She demanded. Who else inside my company? Raymond leaned close enough that cameras would see a worried man speaking privately to a distressed executive. The person who sells you is rarely a stranger. Then he stepped around her and vanished into a waiting black car. In the confusion, Arthur dropped a folder. Celia stooped before he could retrieve it, and by the time she saw what was inside, the car was gone. The folder contained an old transfer agreement dated 9 years earlier, from the months after her father's stroke and before Celia took full control of Whitaker Data Works. At the bottom of the second page was her mother's signature, Margaret Whitaker. Clear and unmistakable beneath language assigning emergency financing rights to an entity that later became one of Raymond's shell companies. Celia stared at the signature as if it were a wound that had learned to write. Graham found her outside under the hotel awning, rain beginning to spit against the pavement, the folder clutched in both hands. She did not ask him what happened. He did not ask why she looked suddenly younger and older at once. My mother signed the first door open, she said. Graham looked at the signature, then at her face. Maybe. Or maybe somebody put her in a room where every door looked locked. Celia wanted to reject that mercy because anger was easier to hold than confusion. Instead, she said, "Take me home." Margaret Whitaker lived in the old family house south of Broad, in rooms full of oil portraits, polished silver, faded rugs, and the heavy silence of people who had learned to keep certain doors closed because opening them would require admitting how long the smell of smoke had been in the walls. Celia entered without calling first, still in the dress from the hotel. Rain damp on her shoulders, the folder in her hand. Her mother was in the sitting room with a book open on her lap, though the lamp beside her had burned low, and it was clear she had not been reading. Graham stayed near the doorway, unwilling to step too far into a family sorrow that did not belong to him, and unable, by instinct, to leave Celia entirely alone inside it. Tell me what this is, Celia said, placing the transfer agreement on the coffee table. Margaret looked at the signature and closed her eyes. Where did you get that? From a hotel hallway, after Raymond Vale walked out with stolen evidence and Arthur Bellamy at his side. Margaret's hand went to her throat. That gesture, small and frightened, told Graham more than denial would have. Celia saw it too, and her anger faltered. You knew, not all of it. You signed, yes, for Raymond? For your father. The room went still around that answer. Margaret stood slowly, not with dignity now, but with exhaustion. After your father's stroke, the company was days from collapse. Vendors unpaid, payroll late, federal contracts under review. You were 26 and sleeping in a hospital chair. Your brother had died 6 months before that, and you had not yet forgiven the world for continuing. Raymond came with money, but money was never the point. He had records from the night Daniel died. Celia's face emptied. Daniel had been her younger brother, a bright, reckless boy who wrapped his car around a live oak outside Mount Pleasant after a party nobody in the family talked about. The public story was rain, speed, tragedy. Margaret's voice shook as she told the rest. There had been a passenger, a girl from Daniel's college, injured badly enough that her family could have sued everyone into dust. There had been liquor purchased through a company card by an employee trying to please the founder's son. There had been a local officer willing to bury details until Raymond acquired copies. He told me he would make Daniel a criminal in every paper in the state, Margaret said. He told me he would make your father's company responsible for a dead boy's last mistake while your father was learning to speak again and you were already carrying more than any daughter should carry. Arthur told me signing was temporary. He said it was a bridge. He said he would watch Raymond. Celia sat down as if her knees had lost their instructions. Arthur brought it to you? Margaret nodded, tears slipping down her face without drama, which made them harder to look at. I thought I was saving what was left for you. Celia stared at the table. You let me build my life on a lie. I let you build a life at all, Margaret whispered, then covered her mouth because she heard the cruelty of it only after it escaped. Graham looked away. He had known rooms like this, where love and fear became so tangled that nobody could tell which one had done the damage. Celia rose, walked to the window, and stood with her back to them. For a long time, no one spoke. Finally, Graham said, not to excuse Margaret and not to condemn her, men like Raymond do not ask people to betray. They arrange the room so betrayal looks like protection. Celia turned slightly. You sound like you know. Graham's eyes lowered to the worn seam of his jacket. I once trusted a man who changed one address in one file because he thought it would make an operation cleaner. A witness paid for that decision. So did the family who believed me when I said they were safe. Margaret looked at him then with the stunned recognition of one guilty person seeing another survivor of consequences. Celia understood only part of it, but the part was enough. Before anyone could ask more, Harlan called. The safe was on the move. Raymond's car had been tracked to a private airfield near Monk's Corner, where a charter jet was scheduled wheels up before dawn under a medical transport exemption that looked false from a mile away. Beatrice had reached a federal contact, but agents were at least 40 minutes out. Celia picked up her coat. Margaret reached for her. Celia, don't. Celia paused. I have been paying for a secret I never made. Tonight I stopped paying quietly. Graham followed her out because there are moments when a person's decision is wrong and moments when it is dangerous but necessary. This was the second kind. The airfield lay beyond a 2-lane road cut through pine and marsh, its runway lights glowing amber under a low ceiling of clouds. The air smelled of jet fuel, wet grass, and the metallic promise of rain. Graham parked Harlan's van behind a row of storage sheds and laid out the plan in a voice that did not invite heroics. Celia would remain by the fence line where the security camera covered the gate. She would confirm the safe if Graham brought it within view, call Beatrice, and keep the federal contact updated with coordinates. Harlan would monitor the access road and trigger a gate malfunction if Raymond tried to leave by vehicle. Graham would enter through an old maintenance corridor used by fuel crews, retrieve the safe if possible, and avoid any confrontation that did not serve the evidence. Celia did not like being assigned stillness as a task. Graham saw that and said, "Control is not the same as usefulness." She looked at him sharply, then nodded because she had learned more in 48 hours than pride could comfortably digest. He slipped through the maintenance corridor, carrying a borrowed access badge Harlan had acquired from a mechanic who owed back taxes and disliked Raymond's men on principle. Inside the cargo building, the lights buzzed overhead, throwing long shadows across crates, luggage carts, and a row of rolling tool cabinets. Graham found the safe on a metal table beside a second folder he had not expected. He opened the folder first and went cold. It contained fabricated wire approvals in Celia's name, falsified audit notes, draft emails timed for release, and a forensic narrative designed to show she had personally directed illegal transfers through Whitaker DataWorks. Raymond had not simply planned to take her company. He had planned to leave her facing prison for the crimes he had committed under her roof. Graham tucked the folder under his arm, lifted the safe, and turned as Niles stepped from behind a pallet with 2 men he had not seen before. "Old man," Niles said, though Graham was only 47. "You should have stayed at dinner." The first man came in wide, overconfident. Graham cut the overhead lights with a thrown tool, dropped the room into emergency red, and used the sudden darkness to move. A luggage cart slammed into shins. A rolling cabinet blocked the second man's path. Niles swung a metal baton and caught Graham across the ribs, hard enough to send pain up his side in a white flash. Graham absorbed it, closed distance, and put Niles down against the concrete with enough force to end the fight, but not the man. Outside, Celia watched the small tracker Harlan had clipped to Graham's belt flicker once on her phone and vanish. For one terrible second, she froze, every old habit screaming that she should run toward him, and every new lesson telling her that panic was exactly how Raymond turned courage into leverage. She called Beatrice instead. She called the federal contact. She gave the coordinates, the charter number painted on the aircraft tail, the names she had, the names she suspected, and the fact that fabricated evidence was about to leave the state. Her voice shook only once. Then Graham emerged from the cargo door, limping, one cheek cut, safe in one hand, folder under the other arm. Celia ran to him before she could remember who she had been trained to appear to be. "You're hurt." "Not usefully," he said, which was such an absurd answer that she almost cried. Then Raymond stepped from behind a parked fuel truck with a pistol leveled at Graham's chest. The world narrowed to runway lights, rain beginning at last, and Raymond's voice, calm as a banker's signature. "Put it down." Graham shifted without seeming to move, placing his body between the gun and Celia. Raymond smiled. "There it is, the old reflex. I wondered if Graham Voss was still under all that handyman humility." Celia's eyes moved to Graham, then back to the gun. Raymond continued, pleased to own the revelation. "Deputy Director, Witness Security Task Force, U.S. Marshals attached to federal financial crimes and organized racketeering. Quietest knife the government had until one of his own people sold a location and a witness family burned for it. Then he ran off to raise a daughter and fix locks for old ladies." Graham's face did not change, but Celia felt the truth land between them. Raymond's smile sharpened. "You cost my network $32 million in seized accounts, Mr. Voss. Did you think I forgot your name?" "No," Graham said. "I hoped you stayed stupid." Raymond's finger tightened on the gun. A man with a child should be more careful about making enemies. Celia felt something cold move through her. Graham did not. He looked at Raymond with a steadiness so complete it felt almost merciful. "You mention my daughter again, and the only thing I will regret is that she raised me better than you deserve." Headlights swept the runway in the distance. Harlan's van came through the service gate at an angle, followed by two unmarked federal vehicles moving fast. Raymond grabbed Celia's arm in desperation, trying to pull her in front of him. She did not become the woman in the restaurant hallway again. She drove her heel down on his instep, twisted away, and kicked the portable safe across the wet pavement beyond his reach. The half-second was enough. Graham moved inside the gun line, turned Raymond's wrist, stripped the pistol, and put him face down on the ground before the first federal agent shouted a command. Rain fell harder. Raymond laughed once into the pavement, breathless and bitter. "You still have someone inside," he said as they cuffed him. "You think this ends with me?" Graham looked at Celia. She was staring not at Raymond, but at the safe, at the folder, at the proof that her life had almost been rewritten by men who assumed paper could make lies holy. "No," she said. "It ends when we name every hand that touched it." By noon the next day, the drive had been decrypted under federal supervision in Beatrice Wynn's office, with Harlan, Celia, Graham, and two agents present for the chain of custody. The files did more than confirm Raymond's laundering. They mapped a decade of extortion, the Tampa processor, the Norfolk port firm, a pharmacy benefit company in Ohio, a family-owned payroll service in Kansas, all pressured, smeared, acquired, and stripped. The internal accomplice was not merely Arthur Bellamy's bad judgment or one frightened signature from Margaret years earlier. Arthur had been paid from the beginning, first in quiet consulting fees, then in preferred equity, then in a seat on the acquiring entity that would have taken Whitaker DataWorks once Celia was removed. He had supplied Raymond with Margaret's signature, Daniel's records, board schedules, audit committee notes, and the private details that made each threat feel personal. Celia called the emergency board meeting herself. She chose the main conference room on the 23rd floor, where portraits of her father and grandfather hung on opposite walls, and the harbor could be seen beyond the glass. She arrived early, not through the executive elevator, but through the employee entrance, walking past engineers, clerks, and support staff who had seen the headlines and did not know whether to pity her, fear her, or believe her. She stopped in the lobby long enough to say, "The truth will be on the record today." That sentence traveled through the building faster than any press release. In the boardroom, Arthur Bellamy sat at his usual place with both hands folded on the table, the fatherly sorrow already arranged on his face. "Celia," he said, "before this begins, I urge you to consider the damage of turning a private governance issue into a public spectacle." Celia set the airfield folder in front of him. "You made my family's grief into leverage. We are past private." Beatrice presented first the transaction trails, equity interests, shell entities, and communications between Arthur's personal account and Raymond's consulting network. Harlan followed with the vehicle tracking, hotel footage, false police identification photographs, and toll records. Graham spoke only when necessary, laying out the sequence from the restaurant hallway to the airfield in clean, unemotional detail. He did not mention his service until Arthur tried to save himself by saying, "Are we really accepting the word of a man with a concealed federal past and a history of violence?" Graham looked at him across the table. "You do not have to accept my word. The camera sees what it sees. The records say what they say. The agents who witnessed the arrest are outside this room. My past is not evidence against Celia. Your bank account is evidence against you." Arthur reached for his water and missed the glass. That small failure broke more than any confession could have. The board voted to remove him before the hour ended. Federal agents escorted him out through the same hallway where he had walked beside Raymond the night before. Margaret, who had insisted on attending despite Celia's reluctance, stood near the back of the room in a gray suit she had not worn since her husband's last public event. When the vote was done, she stepped forward and faced her daughter in front of directors, attorneys, and staff who had gathered at the open door. "I thought silence was protection," she said. "I was wrong. I am sorry for every year I let you carry consequences without knowing their source." Celia did not forgive her in one sweeping gesture, because real wounds do not close on command for the comfort of witnesses. But she took her mother's hand. That was enough for the room to understand that something other than governance had shifted. Graham slipped out while people were still speaking in low, stunned voices. He had done this many times in another life, appear when danger sharpened, do what the moment required, then leave before gratitude became expectation or attachment, became another kind of risk. Celia caught him by the elevators. Her heels sounded loud in the long corridor. "You were leaving. You have attorneys, agents, and a board that has rediscovered its spine. My usefulness is declining." "That is a terrible answer." He almost smiled. "It's accurate. I want you to build a strategic security division for the company. Not guards with earpieces. Something real. Threat assessment, witness protection, employee reporting channels, crisis response. You would have authority, budget, whatever you need." Graham looked toward the elevator numbers descending slowly. "No." She had expected resistance, not refusal that clean. "Because of Lottie? Because of Lottie and because of me. I left a life where every phone call could become a door I had to run through. I will not raise my daughter inside someone else's emergency." This would not be that. It would become that if I let it. Celia folded her arms, hurt showing only in the smallest tightening around her mouth. So you save people and disappear before they can know you? The question found him. He looked down the corridor, past the glass wall, toward the city beyond it. Sometimes staying is harder than standing up. Then learn harder things, she said, not cruelly. He met her eyes. The elevator arrived, doors opening behind him. He did not step in at once. Build something that protects people before they need a man at table 6, he said. Then call me. Not for a job that owns my nights, for work that lets me go home when I promised I would. The doors began to close. Celia put her hand against them, holding them open. Then that is what I'll build. The corrections came slowly, as corrections always do, limping behind the lie they are meant to repair. The same anchors who had described Celia as unstable now spoke carefully about federal indictments, fabricated evidence, and a widening investigation into Raymond Vale's financial network. Smaller companies that had been ruined years earlier came forward once they saw Raymond in handcuffs and Arthur Bellamy's name on charging documents. A widow in Tampa sent Celia a letter saying her husband died, believing the world thought him a thief. A former port operator from Virginia came to Charleston and cried in Beatrice Wynn's lobby because someone finally had the documents to prove he had not stolen from his own employees. Celia changed Whitaker DataWorks in ways that made older board members uncomfortable and younger employees loyal. She opened audit channels outside executive control. She published ownership disclosures no private company of their size had ever volunteered. She created an employee protection fund, then expanded it to contractors, vendors, and eventually owners of smaller firms facing coercive financial pressure. She called Graham 3 weeks after the board meeting, not from her office, but from the sidewalk outside a middle school where she had just watched Lottie Voss win a regional science award for a bridge model built from balsa wood and stubbornness. Graham found her standing beneath a live oak, applauding with everyone else while Lottie blushed under the attention and tried to pretend she did not love it. "This is unfair," he said quietly when he reached Celia. "You came where you knew I would have to be polite. Your daughter invited me. My daughter has poor operational discipline. She has your eyes. She has her mother's courage." Celia looked toward Lottie, who was now explaining load distribution to a boy twice her height. "I built it," Celia said. "The program?" "The beginning of it, independent charter, no corporate override. Beatrice on governance, Harlan advising investigations, support for whistleblowers, threatened employees, and small business owners targeted by financial coercion. I want you to design the response protocols. 3 days a week at most. No nights unless someone's immediate safety is at risk and you choose to answer. Written limits. Real authority inside those limits. And the program reaches the companies Raymond destroyed before mine." Graham watched his daughter laugh at something Mrs. Alvarez said. He thought of his late wife, Elise, who had once told him that hiding from his gifts was not humility if people were still bleeding where those gifts could help. He thought of the Witness family he had failed to keep safe, not because he had betrayed them, but because he had believed a system when his instincts told him to check the door himself. He thought of Celia in the hallway, whispering that they would not let her leave alive, and of the room looking away. "No press," he said. "No title that turns me into a symbol." Agreed. Lottie's schedule comes first unless there is a living person in immediate danger. Agreed. And the first case is the Tampa widow. Celia nodded. Already waiting. He looked at her then, seeing not the cornered woman from the Mariner's Lantern or the executive framed on the morning news, but someone who had been broken open by betrayal and chosen not to harden in the same shape. "All right," he said. 6 months. Celia smiled. "You like 6 months. It is long enough to learn if people mean what they say. And if they do?" Graham looked back toward Lottie. "Then sometimes you stay." The following spring, the Mariner's Lantern reopened its private dining room after a renovation nobody publicly connected to. The night everything changed. The management had changed too. So had the security cameras, the staff training, and the quiet policy that every employee had the authority to call for help without waiting for permission from a man in a better suit. Celia held the first fundraiser for the Whitaker Witness Fund there, not because she wished to decorate trauma with candles and speeches, but because some places should be asked to remember what happened inside their walls. Table 6 was left empty beneath a small brass card that read, "Reserved for the person who refuses to look away." The piano played again in the corner. The river moved black and silver beyond the windows. Business owners from Tampa, Norfolk, Kansas, and Ohio sat beside Whitaker employees, federal investigators, attorneys, waiters, and a few people from Charleston society who seemed less comfortable being present for courage than they had once been being present for fear. Margaret stood near the back, older somehow and lighter too, speaking softly with the widow from Tampa. Lottie came wearing a green dress and sneakers because Graham had lost the argument about formal shoes before it began. She sat with Mrs. Alvarez and drew bridge trusses on the back of the program until Celia asked if she might someday design one for the fund's new office, and Lottie answered, "Only if you don't pick something boring." Graham stood near the hallway where Celia had once been trapped. He wore the same canvas jacket, repaired again at the cuff. Celia found him there after her speech, away from the applause. "You missed the part where I embarrassed you," she said. "I heard enough from here. I said sometimes the person who saves a company is not the one in the boardroom. That was dangerously close to making me a symbol. I did not use your name. Table 6 is not subtle." She looked at the empty table, then back at him. "No, but it is honest." For a moment they stood without speaking, both aware of how far the year had carried them from the night she mistook a public room for safety and he mistook a quiet dinner for ordinary. "Do you ever regret standing up?" she asked. Graham watched Lottie across the room, laughing with a waiter who had brought her extra rolls. "No. Even with everything it pulled you back into?" "It did not pull me back," he said after a while. "It pulled me forward. There is a difference I am still learning." Celia's hand brushed his, not by accident and not quite as a claim. He did not move away. Outside, the Cooper River carried the city lights toward the harbor, indifferent and faithful, taking brightness into dark water without asking who deserved to be reflected. Inside, people who had once been silenced spoke to one another in full voices. A mother and daughter stood side by side with repair still unfinished but possible. A 13-year-old girl drew bridges strong enough to hold imaginary cities. And the man from Table 6, a single father in a worn jacket who had spent years believing his best work was only useful in danger, stood quietly beside the woman he had helped bring home alive and understood at last that staying could be its own form of rescue. Sometimes the greatest heroes are not the ones standing under bright lights or speaking from powerful boardrooms. They are the quiet people sitting at Table 6, the ones the world overlooks, until the moment courage is needed most. This story reminds us that silence can be dangerous, especially when injustice is happening right in front of us. Graham did not stand up because it was easy. He stood up because a woman was being trapped, threatened, and abandoned by everyone who should have helped her. And in that moment, he proved that one brave heart can change the fate of many lives. Life will test us in quiet ways. It will ask whether we will look away, protect ourselves, or step forward for someone who cannot escape alone. True courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing what is right, even when fear is standing beside you. Celia's journey also teaches us that betrayal may break trust, but it does not have to destroy the future. With truth, courage, and the right people beside us, even the darkest rooms can become places of healing, If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments. Would you have stood up like Graham? And don't forget to subscribe for more emotional stories about courage, justice, and the quiet heroes among us.